Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the 5 Elements podcast. We are back today with another exciting episode, one that I'm looking very much forward to, and it's going to be another interview episode. And this is going to be about a topic that I know is everyone's favorite. It's clearly mine. It's something I've been passionate about for a long time, and that's cardio. I know audio platforms aren't the greatest for delivering sarcasm in the most effective way, but it might be no surprise to you that this little meathead does not love cardio, and I've honestly neglected it quite a bit. So when I wrote this article that this interview was for Precision Nutrition, about the recent Zone 2 cardio craze, I took it as a great challenge because it is a body of literature that I've ignored kind of entirely, and it's just something I haven't done enough of. Although I was aware of the new emerging trend of Zone 2 being kind of the new it thing, I did learn a lot when reading for this and from the interview that I did with Brian St.Pierre today. If you don't know who Brian is, he's a PhD and he's one of the big dogs over at Precision Nutrition. So I was really excited to sit down and talk with him because he is a wealth of knowledge and he's just a good hang. And you know what? This pod is about science and it's about learning and it's about, all of that stuff. But it's also just about vibes. And you know me, I'm a big vibes guy. If you're one of my friends, you know that one of my most absurd theories is that the world runs on vibes, like the economy runs on vibes. And there's no truth behind this statement. It's also just a vibe. So it's a vibe within a vibe. We're going Christopher Nolan Inception levels with this shit. And yeah, so since Brian's good vibes, I'm like, you know what? This is a good hang, and he's smart. So that's a little cherry on top there. So we're going to be talking about Zone 2, the craze about it all. And we're going to do a deep dive because if you're on social media, you've probably seen this trend reemerge as the new it thing. When I got into it, it was all about HIIT, and HIIT dominated for a long time when I started in the fitness industry, to the point that doing cardio was a joke. And even though it was always good for our health, you know what? We just love recycling old trends and then acting like they're brand new. We like turning over stones and acting like we discovered something. And if you're like me, you like flipping over the pillow because the other side's just cooler. And sometimes fitness follows that same trend. So, Zone 2, today is what we're going to be getting into. But I want to start with a little bit of roses and thorns. And I'm going to focus this one on training because, well, full transparency, I actually recording this intro very, very close to when I did my last podcast. Those are still my roses and thorns from the last episode. But in training, I didn't talk about that. And sometimes with roses and thorns, we like to talk about training. So my roses and thorns are basically that the rose I'll start with is that I've been training consistently and I feel good. And in theme with today's episode, I've been doing cardio and your boy don't do cardio. So this is actually kind of huge for me. And you know what? You might be thinking, Dylan, you're a personal trainer. Of course you do cardio. Of course you do everything perfectly. And you know what? You don't know me if that's the case. I struggle with this shit too. And if I'm being honest, cardio is something I've never gotten into. So my cardio sessions are like 20 to 30 minutes. You might think that's not a lot. I think that's better than zero. And historically, it's been zero. So I'm gonna keep it real and say that that's where I've been. And the thing about that is that I've paired it with doing something that I am actively trying to learn. So if you do know me, you know I've been learning Spanish because it's probably all I talk about and I probably annoy the shit out of you. But one thing that I've done is that I've been watching a lot of shows in Spanish with Spanish subtitles. Or if I watch shows that are English, I'll use Spanish subtitles just for exposure. And I've been watching Narcos, and I've been watching it while riding the bike at the gym, in my condo gym, or at the YMCA, or at where I work out of. So that's actually helped me do it because it's made cardio less boring, because it is pretty boring, but it's also really good for our health, and I do want to build up my cardio base. So big rose that I've been doing cardio consistently, and I've been training consistently. Now a thorn, it's a rosy thorn, which this is sometimes we blend. Sometimes roses become thorny and sometimes thorns become rosy. And this is an example of that because it's not a pure thorn, but my training volume is low and I don't really have the tolerance for much higher right now. My frequency is high, like 4 times a week in the gym lifting, but these workouts are short. They're real short. 40 minutes, I'm out. And that's really kind of all I got. And I'm okay with that. Historically, I would have been very hard on myself for not training as hard as I should, but I'm doing a lot right now. And I am rehabilitating my relationship with the gym at the same time because there was a period where I wasn't training much and I started to loathe the gym, and now I'm loving it again. Even if it is a lower volume than what it used to be, I'm in a real good spot with that. So that's my roses and thorns for the week. Oh, as always, I'm so bad at pitching my own business. So as always, if you want to work with me online, I do offer online coaching. So I can do your programming. I can do some help with your nutrition, with whatever it is. To be completely blunt, if weight loss is your number one goal, probably not your guy. I can help you improve your nutrition, help you improve your relationship with food, and help you eat in a way that's going to support your training and goals. But if you're myopic and focusing on weight loss, I'm probably not your guy. But if you want to get strong, you want to build muscle, you want to build some confidence in the gym, and you want to develop nutritional habits that are going to help you get healthier and develop your confidence, hopefully around food as well, I'm definitely one of the people that you could hire, and hopefully you would hire me. So I'm going to leave some notes for that in the show notes if you want to check out what I offer with online coaching. And again, make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to this. Tell your friends. Word of mouth is quite valuable, so share this on social media, share with your friends. Tell random people on the street. I don't care. Any way you get it out, I'm stoked about it. And lastly, before we get in the actual interview with Brian, I want to talk about some stuff around Zone 2 just to kind of preface this conversation. First thing being, you're probably going to hear the name Peter Attia a lot in this episode. I remembered how much we talked about him when I edited it. No shade at that dude. He's actually a good voice in this industry. Sometimes I can be critical of how people communicate, especially when I'm noticing the people who are listening to that message running wild with that message. One of the things I'll always notice is, hey, that could definitely be communicated better. But he's a smart guy. He knows a lot more about cardio than I do. But we do talk about him because he seems to be the guy that has really revamped this Zone 2 craze over the last little while. And I do think net overall, that's a good thing. More people are probably doing cardio. But he's a little bit more serious about it than the average person who's going to come across this content. And I have noticed that some people are starting to feel and communicate, oh, am I doing things wrong? Do I need to be doing this? How much do I need to do? Do I have to do 40 minutes per session or I don't get the value of it? Is it going to increase my mitochondrial health so I can live longer? There is a lot of other things that intersect here that can kind of make this movement cause more problems than it does help. Because at the end of the day, Zone 2 is just a rebranded term for steady state cardio. And that was something I found interesting when reading some of the literature. Zone 2 is not a term that you will see in the literature. You will see other terms, and it's kind of just steady state cardio. Zone 2 is what some people will use to define Zone 2, and other people have different definitions. So as we'll talk about, Peter Attia and some other researchers, Inigo San Milan is a very prominent researcher in this field right now, they'll use lactate meters, prick themselves in the finger or their subjects to make sure that their blood lactates are below a certain level, and that would dictate whether you're in what they would call Zone 2 or not. Now, sometimes you can just use your Apple Watch, and they're not the most accurate devices. They've gotten better over time. Or people use a chest strap and you might get a predictive model of what Zone 2 should be around, but you don't entirely know. And there are some things you can use to kind of assess whether you're not in Zone 2, but it's an imperfect science. And although sometimes the science communication sounds a little bit more confident than it should be, to be honest, because it's more incomplete than might be led on, cardio is still good. So one thing I want to reiterate is doing more cardio is going to be a good thing for your overall health. I've talked about it before. It's probably not the greatest thing in isolation for weight loss. If you are looking for weight loss, people historically have started doing a ton more cardio. The data on that as an individual method for losing weight isn't that great, but don't do cardio for weight loss. Do it for your health. You might get some transient weight loss while you do it, but if you're doing it solely for weight loss, it's not the greatest tool, partially because there is some sort of compensation mechanism from increasing energy expenditure. So for example, if you were to burn 100 calories extra from doing cardio, you might not burn an extra total 100 calories in your day. Depending on individual differences, you might compensate and your body might reduce energy expenditure by 50 calories throughout the rest of your day. Then you only get an extra 50 in, but you think you burned a lot more. That's just one example, and it is kind of diverse how each individual will compensate. Some do less, some do more. Nothing you can really do about that, but cardio on its own isn't the greatest for weight loss. It is quite effective for improving our overall health though. So that's one of the reasons you should do it. Or if you do a sport. Brian and I will talk about that quite a bit in this podcast, how valuable building up your aerobic base, so not always going balls to the wall with everything you do in terms of cardio, can be for improving your athletic performance if you're playing a sport that requires you to manage fatigue during the sport. Because I'm someone who can sprint real fast out of the jump, but my aerobic base is pretty weak and I will deplete my energy reserves and I'm not good at managing fatigue, the solution to that isn't doing more sprinting. Not always. A great solution to that is actually, because you also can't do so much more sprinting without just taking away from all your other training, because there's a high level of fatigue that comes from sprinting that you need to recover from. Going for some light jogs, some light cycles can actually help build that aerobic base. Brian and I will get into the details of that, but there's another reason to do it. Some frameworks that I want to lay out to start is, if you're doing no cardio right now, doing anything is great. If you want to do more zone 2, you can use a heart rate monitor. Basically, you'll want to be around 60 to 80% of your heart rate max is going to be the spot you want to hang out in. The classic way to determine that, and this is going to be the easiest way because you don't need any extra tools, is 220 minus your age. That'll generally put you in the ballpark of what your heart rate max is, and then you just multiply that by 0.6 to 0.8. Now, if you do that, say that puts you at zone 2, should be around 115 to 125, and you do an hour of 125 and you're like not even sweating, maybe you can up it a little bit, but you should not be crushed by these sessions. If you can only do 30 minutes, that's amazing. I'm only doing 30 myself, and I am actually noticing benefits. So that's something you should also be aware of. You can use a heart rate strap. The Polar H10 is what I use. The Polar is one of the gold standards, to be honest. They'll even use it in research, and it's not too expensive. You can get it on Amazon for like $100 and something bucks, which isn't nothing, but considering how expensive some fitness tools are and how effective the Polar chest strap is, it's a pretty good one if you want to use this. You can use your Apple Watch or whatever device you have. They're not as accurate, in all honesty. The Fitbits might be the worst from some research that I've read in terms of accuracy. And unfortunately, sometimes they get less accurate the higher your heart rate gets. It's kind of ironic in terms of how we actually use these things. And another one you can do if you want to do low intensity cardio, the talk test or the sing test are pretty effective. Hop on the bike or a treadmill. You should be able to talk and maintain a conversation while doing this, but you probably can't sing. And I don't mean you can't sing well, because your boy can never sing well, but you can't really sing because you are training your cardiovascular system, but you can have a conversation. You should be able to have one. If you can't hold a conversation, you're probably gearing up in the higher intensity zones. Those are great for other things. They're not great for zone 2 and building your aerobic base maximally while managing fatigue. So if you want to get into doing more cardio, I suggest doing whatever you can to make it more enjoyable. That could be, the weather's getting nice out here in Canada. If you're from somewhere with nice weather all the time, I mean, just rub it in our face, why don't you? If you're from somewhere like here, where half the year is kind of smothered in a dark existential hole that doesn't allow you to leave your house for the majority of the day, I'm not depressed, you're depressed. It's going to be it'll be helpful now that the sun will be out more and you can go for bike rides and runs, etc. Or you can just be a mole man like myself and do everything inside at a gym or at your condo gym, etc., etc. Start slow, build in what you can, right? It shouldn't be taking away from your main goals in the gym, whether it's lifting, getting stronger. I just gave 2 of the same goals. Clearly, the only thing I can think of is getting stronger. Whatever your main goal is, the cardio shouldn't take away from it. It should add to it. Start with what you can manage and build up from there. Find any way to make it more enjoyable. I like to watch a TV show while I'm doing it. You can play a sport. Sometimes I go to the YMCA and just shoot the basketball around at a light intensity wearing my chest strap. That actually is a great way to get that in, and then go from there. If you aren't doing this zone 2, you are not missing out on some magic bullet that will for sure extend your lifespan. The mitochondrial stuff is accurate to some degree, but one thing to remember is mitochondrial health is improved by almost all exercise. Lifting does it as well. And if you're not doing this, you're not missing out on some magic pill. Remember that, because that narrative tends to be quite popular now, because longevity has become a very popular buzzword in the fitness industry, and the science on it is very premature. It is another way for us to get even more neurotic and try to control every facet of our life and kind of just not enjoy life along the way. Some of those longevity guys, you might listen to their daily routines and think, dude, are you a fucking robot? I have no idea who can do this, first of all, because we're not all playboy billionaires. And second of all, when the hell did you have fun? I just got a little heated there. But it is a key to remember. You're not missing out on some magic bulb by not doing it, but it is a good thing to add into your routine if you can fit it in. And that's where I'll leave that. Last thing I will say, the audio on this from my end is really bad in the interview because I didn't hook my mic up. So just Be patient with me. This shouldn't happen again where my audio is this bad, but it's not good. Thankfully, Brian's is, and I tried to edit out myself as much as possible, but just be aware it sounds like I'm talking through a tin can. That's all. So with my ramblings out of the way, sit back and enjoy my interview with Brian St.Pierre of Precision Nutrition, all about Zone 2 cardio. Definitely curious to your perspective because you obviously have been in the game a really long time.
You're
Not to
dating
call you
me.
old, not to call you old, calling you experienced.
I
Um,
remember being young in this field once. So yes, go ahead.
yeah, so I guess the first thing I want to ask is the one thing that I found very interesting researching for this article is just how the term zone two is more of a novel term compared to all the other things we've used to call kind of steady state cardio throughout the
The
years. So
fat burning zone.
yeah. So what in your words is zone two cardio?
Okay, this might be a long answer, but this is why you're recording it, right? I mean, in my mind, there are really like two different things that we're talking about here. There's like zone two cardio from a performance oriented perspective,
Okay.
right? Which is really how like Peter Attia and crew talk about it a lot. I mean, that's where it came from. Like he was an intense cyclist years ago,
Yeah.
and they use zone two training for performance enhancement. It seems to have health benefits, but as does all exercise
Yeah.
modality. So now, but it's being talked about in relation to like longevity and health improvement and all that kind of stuff, which is great. But I think people get lost in the weeds of like, oh my God, does it need to be exactly, 60% or 70% of my heart rate? Or do I use like I can't remember the MAF formula, or do I do lactate? Like, because it's really not super clear how to get exactly in zone two. And who's going to be fucking sticking a prick
Yeah.
in their finger like, that's just not, unless you are training for high level performance enhancement. Then people are willing to do things because it has a very meaningful difference on their race performance, right? Whether I'm exactly in zone two or kind of between zone two, zone three for long term health and well being probably doesn't matter. So I know this really isn't answering your question, but I think it's something that needs to be clear in like how it's being talked about a lot today. People are talking about it in relation to long-term health and well-being,
Mhm.
but they're using the frame of reference of like, oh, it's got to be a certain lactate threshold or whatever from like a performance standpoint. Like in
Yeah.
reality, if my mom is doing steady state cardio, if she's at 130 beats per minute instead of 137 and her lactate is at 2 instead of 1.9, it probably doesn't make any meaningful difference to someone like that,
Yeah.
right? Because it's still improving my overall health and well-being. It's still improving my metabolic flexibility because my mitochondria are still using fat for fuel. It's not like it's not a switch,
Yeah, that was. I'm
right?
glad you mentioned that. That was something that actually did answer my question because that was where I couldn't help but stop skewing to that point of like I think a lot of people don't realize that it's not that zone two is not a thing. It's just first of all, interesting to a lot of people. It's not a standardized principle within any exercise science literature that I read. I
That the
didn't see
zone
the
5
word.
model, the 7 zone model, the
Yeah,
like,
these are branding terms for a lot of how certain organizations have kind of stratified how they organize their training. So
right.
there's another researcher from Norway that I was listening to some of his work where he just uses like green, yellow, red. That's even would be a three zone terminology. So I think it was important to me to try to like reiterate to the reader so that they know not that it's not useful, but it is a made up model that certain people are using in different contexts for different outcomes. I think a lot of people think like, oh, zone two is like this evidence-based thing that I have to be doing. It's a dichotomous thing of once I go past, depending on the model, if you go past 70% no longer or past 2 millimoles per
Right.
liter
Oh,
of
it's no
lactate.
longer beneficial.
Yeah, yeah.
What?
Yeah, no, that's interesting you said that because that was a similar kind of thing that came up too. So like, yeah, I guess the question is like it depends on what you're looking for in terms of
Hmm.
what zone two means to you. Is there anything else you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, I think zone two, it's one of those things. It's not to, I want to make sure that we are not trying to discount it, right?
Yes.
Like, if you've been in the industry long enough, you see the pendulum swing, right?
Yeah.
So it used to be that people were supposed to go to the fat burning zone because it's greatest proportion of fat, even though the absolute amount wasn't necessarily more.
Yeah.
So then what does the proportion really matter? And then it was a huge pivot to high intensity interval training,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So like when I was coming into the field in particular, it was intervals, way more efficient, the Tabata protocol, blah, blah, blah. And now you're seeing that, and even like CrossFit, and there are, as things tend to do in a progression, right?
Yeah.
But now there's been a pendulum swing back to like, oh, we got to do lots of zone 2 again, just a rebranding of the fat burning zone. And so I think it's ultimately, to your point, it can be dependent upon what you're trying to accomplish, whether it's really improved performance or if it's really just for like health and well-being and longevity. Those things are also intertwined. They're not like completely separate entities. And I also think like it's just important for people to keep in mind this is just like one, just like lifting weights. It's one modality of an overall exercise approach, right? Hey, and the great thing about it compared to like intervals, for example, is it doesn't beat the shit out of you, right? It doesn't take best, might actually enhance recovery, or at worst is recovery neutral,
Yeah.
as opposed to like intervals require recovery from them. So I
Absolutely.
think that's where, and that's why endurance athletes use them so much. Yes, it increases mitochondrial density, and
Right.
yes, it increases mitochondrial function, but they can also get in a lot of volume and without it crushing them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's
that's a
the
key,
primary reason. That's not
right? Right. It's a
um
key piece of why they do it, right?
100%. That's interesting. It's interesting how you shared about the hit thing because I've been a trainer for about 10 years, maybe 11 years now. I remember when I started, hit was everything. And it swung so aggressive that like it was like doing steady state cardio was dumb. Like you would
Yes.
almost shame people. Like,
You
why do
want to
you
be slow?
what do you want to lose all your muscle? Do you like you
Yeah.
what is wrong with you? You do hit like it's more efficient. And then I felt like over the last maybe 4 years, there was a renaissance in like lifting weights. Everyone needs to be lifting weights. Like cardio doesn't even really matter. It's all about building muscle. There's obviously like the exact is for body composition. There's the exaggerated thing of like if you build muscle, you're gonna burn more calories. Well, statistically true, not practically meaningful. It's like
Right.
14 calories per pound of metabolic active tissue. Like, but you just hear the words, I'm gonna burn more. So then that became the thing. It's like cardio is actually overrated because of X, Y, and Z. And then interestingly enough, now it's like, dude, zone 2 is where it's at. And it feels a lot like fashion. It's like bell bottoms made their return.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's
everyone was like, they reopened their closets, and we don't call them bell bottoms now. We call them floods. Like that's
yeah.
kind of what it feels like. It's
Hey,
the same.
cargo pants are coming back. I was just at my daughter's dance competition, and they wore like cargo pants for all of their. I was like, you've got to be kidding me! Like
Huh.
that was me in sixth grade. You know, like
That happens in fitness. That also happens just kind of in life where things they are in, they are out. And then use your daughter or like her friends, they call it by a different name or do they call them cargo pants?
I'd have to ask. I don't even know
Yeah. Is
because
that be
it's this is like brand new coming back. But it's I almost equate it to like remember the movie Moneyball and look at like they were looking for like market
yeah. Yeah.
inefficiencies,
Billy
like
Bean.
oh on base percentage, all that. It's the same kind of idea. They're just looking for something that's somewhat novel that hasn't been right. It's essentially like cargo pants weren't novel to us, but they're novel to my kids. Like
Yes.
no one wears cargo pants. That's why they become cool again
Yeah.
because they're basically novel to them. And so they're not going to want to dress like we dress because we're not cool.
Yeah.
You know. So it's really and exercise is much the same, particularly today with social media and
Mm.
influencers who need like you constantly need new content.
Yeah.
Right? So if you can't keep saying lift weights, do some cardio, eat fruits and vegetables, you're not going to stand out in a crowd
Yeah.
with
You want
that
to find the next
even
one.
though it's really what people need to do.
So, what is unique about the benefits of doing that compared to other intensities of heart rate zones or heart rate intensity?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the one of the one I mentioned is it is either recovery positive or recovery neutral.
Okay.
It doesn't like withdraw from the tank, right? You do a hard like resistance training session, and like man, it takes it out of you, right? And then like the next day you're sore, you're not gonna be able to necessarily lift again. You might, depending on what you're doing, but it requires significant recovery. Intervals require significant recovery. Zone 2 doesn't really. And it definitely has benefits in terms of like we talked about increasing mitochondrial density. So, and it makes them more efficient. It improves metabolic flexibility or ability to use like fats or carbs as fuel. Whereas training at like zone 5, like highest, doing super high intervals, we're working on just using carbohydrates for fuel for the most
Yeah.
part, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I actually heard I'm gonna go off on a slight tangent here. I thought it was a really useful mental model, like Peter Attia talking about this. And he's like, zone 2 work is like the base of your pyramid. Zone 5 work or just high intensity work really helps make that pyramid nice and tall. That's your VO2 max. Like we don't want a narrow pyramid that's super tall, and we don't want a super wide pyramid that's like really short. And granted, he's really talking about for performance purposes, but it's also for health and well-being purposes. Having a
Yes.
good aerobic base and having some good VO2 max is like these are also markers of like health and longevity. So that's why I was saying like performance and longevity aren't necessarily entirely separate entities, but if you're training for performance, you have to be more specific about particular things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Versus because you're trying to maximize very specific like biochemical pathways or metabolic pathways. Whereas like I don't give a shit about that, right? I'm just trying to be fit and healthy and like, hey, can I squeeze this in 45 minutes before my kids get up?
Yeah.
Like, but I actually envisioned it almost as more of like a three-dimensional model where you have like some lower steady state stuff because it has unique benefits compared to the intervals or running super hard for 3 miles, which is going to put you in zone 4, so zone 5, right? Something like that. But you also, if you do strength work, now it's like a three-dimensional pyramid.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it in. Yeah, because the
So
strength doesn't your obviously your heart rate is going to toggle between different intensities, but it's not primarily training your cardiovascular system, so it doesn't fit into that model. As with a three-dimensional one, you can kind of
right,
theoretically be like, here's how this would fit into
right,
it.
it makes it that much more stable, right? If you're just using it
It
as like a weight,
hypertrophies the model, essentially.
right? It hypertrophies the model, exactly,
Increases the cross-sectional
exactly.
area of the model.
Yeah. So I really liked his. Now, granted, it's also because they do, and it also works for the idea of you do a shitload of stuff to increase that base and a smaller amount to increase the peak. But ultimately, I'm using it as like, hey, like here's what zone 2 stuff gives you, right? It really helps expand that aerobic base so you can go for long periods of time. You can use fat as fuel more efficiently. And as you get better at it, even at higher intensities. So, which is really mostly important for like performance oriented individuals,
Yeah.
right? So, like I'm doing a race. And now, because I've been doing this, I can still run hard with a lower heart rate, right?
Yes.
So I
Yes.
feel
Okay.
less stressed and I'm better able to use fat as a fuel. So I'm less likely to bonk and I'm less likely to be quite so carb dependent, but still giving myself plenty of carbs allows me to still sprint and run because I can use both fuels efficiently.
Yeah.
Whereas like athletes that are fat adapted, just do keto, have a really hard time with sprinting and using carbohydrate as a fuel because they don't use carbohydrate as a fuel. So it's the ability to use either fuel efficiently and well. And you only do that by doing both types of training,
So
which is still good for overall health, but you don't have to be like so insane about, being exactly.
yeah, like kind of being neurotic about like these parameters that are used by elite athletes.
Right, exactly.
So I know you play hockey. What I think a lot of people forget about in the zone 2 discourse is that it is going to be primarily dominated by folks like Atia and Inigio San Milan, who's like researching elite level cyclists. Now, if
Exactly.
I'm a hockey player,
Exactly.
if I'm a hockey player, football player, soccer player, why would zone 2 matter to me if I know that most of my performance is going to live more anaerobically, but why should I be doing more zone 2 if I'm if I'm an athlete in a more anaerobically dominated sport?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it actually relates to that pyramid concept I was talking about. By having a strong aerobic base, right, you actually recover. Like, so for hockey, you recover faster between shifts. So I'm
Yes.
sitting on the bench, my heart rate lowers more rapidly, right? I'm actually better able to use fat as fuel while I'm resting so that I'm not using my carbohydrate stores even while sitting on the bench. So I'm
Yeah,
less
so that
likely
would be
to
that would talk into metabolic flexibility. Like as your heart rate comes down, you can be able to kind of fuel energy through more fat mobilization on the bench as opposed to depleting all your glycogen reserves in the first period.
and because of that zone 2 stuff and now I've increased mitochondrial density and like efficiency, my heart rate actually drops faster,
Yes. Okay. Okay.
right? So if I'm just doing, I mean, obviously intervals can also assist with that, but if all you're doing is super high intensity, like essentially stress oriented workouts, you're training your body that exercising is or moving is super stressful and everything has to be like balls out, like
Yeah.
guns blazing. And so this actually helps you bring that parasympathetic nervous system in and like boom, tone things down. So when you go back out for your shift, now you're not really using zone 2 like on the shift, right? Because you're basically sprinting around on the ice. So that's where that peak of that pyramid comes from. Right? We
Yes.
want to get that as high as we can so that your VO2 max, like your ability to use oxygen at peak, while really pushing it to your limit, is as high as it can be. So you can
Yeah.
be sprinting around on the ice, but then when you come off, you can recover super fast. So that having that strong aerobic base helps bring that recovery, improve that recovery between shifts. And so that come the third period, you still have a lot of gas in the tank. Just doing intervals won't quite provide the same benefit by come the third period or over the grind of a season, right, to keep your cardiovascular fitness up. If you're just doing intervals all the time, in addition to your playing, you're just adding more stress. Whereas, right, that zone 2 stuff can help you recover. It can actually help with keeping that aerobic base up, which can improve overall performance long term. It's not going to make you better within a shift,
Yeah.
right? But it can help you between shifts, recover so that you can maximize your output.
Yeah, and then mitigate fatigue, because the
Right.
fatigue is just going to make you worse. You're not going to get better in a shift, but you can get worse.
Right.
And fatigue is going to be probably the dominating factor that makes you worse,
Right.
as opposed to you're just trying to maintain.
And so that come the third period, you're still able to put your peak effort out there during those shifts.
What was going through your mind as you kind of saw this recent resurgence of the focus on like zone two and how that ties into the big surgence in longevity talk in terms in the fitness industry? Because that seems to be something that is a huge pocket of the fitness industry. And I think a
Yes.
lot of everyday people are maybe outside of that space looking in like, man, am I missing something huge right now? Like what's going on?
Yes. So as usual, my thoughts were like seeing it from many different angles.
Yeah.
So the first angle is like, hey, he's getting people to be more aware of the value of not just doing intervals. Like there's value in doing some easier steady state work, right? And not just for elite endurance athletes.
Yeah.
But there's value in someone going out there and doing like a 30-minute, and not everything has to be like hammering, which takes a toll on you, right? Particularly in a world where we already have a ton of stress and we may not get enough sleep and we rely too much on caffeine, right? If you're all you're doing is lifting hard and doing cardio hard, like there actually can be a price to pay for that if you're not recovering enough.
Yeah.
So I think it's brought about some of the change in the conversation on the value of adding in some lower intensity work like that still gives you health and performance benefit at a much lower cost. Now, it takes more volume of it to see that benefit. You have to do it in longer chunks and more often. So I think there are also limits to the practical application for
Yeah.
the average exerciser. Like, but that's where I differentiate between like the elite athlete who, might have to do it 3 times a week, 4 times a week, 5 times a week for an hour. Whereas like the average person just looking to live longer and be healthier might only be able to get in 1 or 2 sessions for 30 to 45 minutes. And I want to emphasize like that is okay. You're
Yeah.
not looking to push performance metrics to the max, right? You're just looking to be healthier and fitter. And so my other perspective on it is I worry that there's still too much focus on like, oh wow, because Atia is guilty of this. He'll be like, well, we're not really talking about like, the 60 to 70% max heart rate. It's not really a great way to measure it. Like, I don't give a fuck. For my
Yeah.
mom, that's irrelevant,
Yeah.
right? Is she getting out there? Is she increasing her heart rate? Is she like getting her blood flowing and forcing her body to use more fat for fuel without like franking herself way up? Borderline zone 3. Like, does that really matter for them? Where the margins for an elite athlete, the margins matter. If you're 1% better than me at the elite level, like that's actually a massive difference. If my overall health and longevity is improved by 1%, I can't even notice that,
Yeah.
like
100%.
it's like getting a 97 or a 98 on my test. Like, yes, technically a 98 is better, but they're both an A plus and you can't really tell the difference.
The Atia, I find it very interesting in this because I'm going to say I was probably more critical of him before I listened. I listened to a lot of his stuff, but I think the reason why I was a little more like annoyed by it was because you get what people say about his stuff from like,
Yeah.
it's like a game of telephone, and at least a lot of the people who propose like really like champion his stuff, they're everyday people and they're forgetting that he's talking about elite level athletes. Now, I don't know if that means that he did mention it that we are talking about elite level athletes when I listen to a lot of his work, but maybe not enough. It is a communication thing, and people can get really wrapped up in it. And they're like, "Oh, I should get a lactate meter," and you're like, "No, no, no, dude, you don't need that. Like, you exercise like 2 hours a week. Anything,
Right, exactly.
anything is going to be awesome for you. I don't know if you need to like make this because it's like starting a new fad diet. Like, it's very exciting in the beginning. You buy the Vitamix, you buy whatever tools you don't have before. We get really excited when we come across new
Yes.
tools, and then you just have a bunch of lactate strips sitting there for a year. You're like, I spent $400. I don't know why, but yeah, it was very interesting to read some of his stuff and like how he talks about it. And then it was funny when I was listening to it, I was like, I was getting into it. I was like, oh man, like this stuff. And I'm like, catch yourself, dude. It's enticing, right? And it is valuable, but you can easily forget that they are talking about, again, elite level athletes. And I mean, one of Nigel Samalan's papers that I read, like he was comparing mitochondrial health levels between active people and elite level athletes, all the way from like active to well trained to like sub elite to elite. And the elite people had the healthiest mitochondrial expressions in multiple ways. And you can take that out of context, say that's cool. But then I look at the actual one table of like what stratified each level. Elite level athletes were doing 16 hours a week. And I'm like, well, that like this is useless data to the average person now.
Because it's their job. It's
I
their
could never
job to
say
do.
that. Yeah. Then the active people are doing 3. If I could get any of my clients to do 3 hours of just zone 2 cardio a week, like that's incredible, right? I'm getting 3 hours of any exercise would be awesome.
Right. Right. So exactly. And I'm sure the papers show the people that getting 3 hours, it still had improvement upon
they
that.
were still really healthy. Yeah. Yeah, you're comparing.
So like, sure, if they could get to 5 hours, maybe that would be like the sweet spot, right? Like, particularly with multiple modalities. But if just zone 2 alone, like it makes me wonder, like if in that paper, and maybe there's even research on this, and I'm just not aware of it at the moment. But if someone was doing 2 hours a week of zone 2 and 30 minutes of intervals and 2 hours a week of resistance training, well, what would their overall health and well-being look like,
Yeah.
right? Would their mitochondria, you're still getting benefit to your mitochondria from the interval training, from even the resistance training, not quite, but still they're using glucose as fuel, right? Like your mitochondria are still functioning because your muscles are contracting, and it's a little bit different, but you're still pumping blood. You're still different benefits to resistance training, but there are overlapping benefits. So I would hazard a guess that people lifting like that would see more improvement than the people just doing 3 hours of zone 2 because they're doing more overall activity.
Yeah.
And then there are obviously benefits beyond mitochondrial function,
So that was
right?
actually my
Like
next question.
strength, stability, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, okay, great. You're in great cardiovascular health, but you're not particularly strong. Like, or you don't have a lot of muscle mass. Like, well, that's going to cost you later on. And Atia does do a good job, if you read his book, like talking about the value of being strong and like getting enough protein. But if you only hear snippets and like outtakes, and even when I read his book, I was like, man, he was talking about how his routine, oh, I do 10 hours a week of this and 5 hours. I'm like what? Like when, how do you work? Right? Like,
It was, yeah, it is wild. That's actually like, I mean, Atia does walk the walk, but in the longevity space, there is a lot of just like kind of playboy billionaires who have just all the time in the world to like,
Brian Johnson's of the world.
yeah, just do kind of anything. And I'm like, this is so unattainable for 99% of the people watching
Right.
this.
Right.
It,
And I know there's something that people still find interesting. And if it motivates you to
yeah,
try something new, like, okay, there's value in that. But I want people to go into it with eyes wide open, right? Hey,
yeah,
cool, I'm gonna go try this, but in my own modified version way. Because it'll still be good for me. And I don't have to do it to the nth degree like Brian Johnson. I can do it this much simpler, easier way and get 80% of the benefit and
yeah,
not have to do 300 times as much work.
yeah. And
So
load up the Amex at the same time.
it's the 80/20 rule, right? And it applies here.
Yeah,
The vast majority of your benefits going to come from like just getting started or getting in, you know, like you said, if I can get my clients exercising 3 hours a week,
yeah,
I will take that as a victory,
yeah,
right? Hey, if you can get to 5, even better, but I will take 3
yeah.
because that's more than most people do.
Yeah, because that
So
was one thing that I think I'm curious your perspective on is how would you explain this to someone who, say you're reading the works of someone like Atia or someone who's more in the for performance space here, you'll often hear, or I heard a lot, kind of a 40-minute cutoff of like, you got to go past 40 minutes to really maximize the benefits, especially for mitochondrial health. That seems to be the main metric they're really focused on, at least here.
yes.
Because I know that's Inigo's research is a lot of around that. So that would make sense because in research, I mean, you have a PhD, this, like you get fixated on one thing. Like you can't know everything. Like you can get really granular about one thing. And people are like, I don't know. There's a lot, the whole body. I'm just on the kidney right here.
Right.
So say if someone's doing like 20 minutes, like what's the value in that for the average person?
I
Is it,
mean, I think the answer to that question from like to the average person, the benefit is they're burning calories, right? They are increasing heart rate. Their mitochondria are being used. Now, they're not being stressed at the same way. They're not getting to a point where it's causing a lot of adaptation. But I'm not sure if that's true if this person has never exercised at all,
yes. Okay.
right?
Okay.
If you have never, I don't know this, but I mean, we see people who have never exercised who 15, 20 minutes of exercise is like a lot.
Yeah.
That'd be like you or I exercising for 90 minutes, right? Like it's relative. So I suspect their mitochondria are so far behind. So obviously in them, like, yeah, it takes at least X amount of time for things to start causing adaptation.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
I tend to suspect, I don't know if that's specifically true to zone two and like the mitochondrial things that they're testing, but I suspect some of them. And
Yeah.
certainly we see health improvements in people who do that, right? It doesn't have to be literally doing anything is better than doing nothing. So obviously getting to those 150 minutes of, essentially zone two, that's what the recommendation comes from,
Yeah.
or 75 minutes of more intense is like the sweet spot where we really see like, okay, this is where most people get the most benefit. But if you can only squeeze in 20 minutes,
Yeah.
like, okay, it's still going to cause beneficial adaptations, not to the
Yes.
extent that 40 is. And I almost look at it as like if you think about like in medical terms, like if I took Tylenol and I have to take 400 milligrams for it to really decrease my pain, that's the dose in 2 pills. If I took 300, it's probably not linear, right? It's probably not going to be nearly as effective, but it's still going to do something.
Yeah.
So taking 20 minutes is probably not like, half as good as 40, because we know there are time points where things exponentially increase as opposed to just purely
Yes.
linear
Yes.
increase. Now, if you are really conditioned, is 20 minutes of zone two work going to do much? It'll help with maintenance.
Yeah. I think that's something that gets under. It's like training. Like you can cut your training by like half, and you'll probably maintain a lot of your muscle. You're just not gaining anything new,
Right.
which is
And
value
there's value in that,
for
particularly.
longevity, especially if the crowds are focused on longevity. Maintenance of fitness is massively underrated because it's just not sexy to talk about it, right?
But that's at some point, that's really all you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you're not forever getting stronger or
Yeah.
forever getting more fit. Like, so, I mean, it's good to still push yourself and to still, right? Because I think you can regress faster if you don't do some of those things. But I think it's particularly valuable to hear that, like, okay, it's a super busy week or it's
Mm.
around the holidays and I can't squeeze in 60 minutes of zone two, but I can get in a 20-minute workout. Like, great. It's not going to continue to cause improvement if
Mm.
you were on your path upward. It's helping you tread water while
Yes.
things are crazy.
Yes. Which is better than
Right.
drowning.
Absolutely. I mean,
Can we confidently say that treading water is better than drowning?
1000%.
Okay,
Right.
beautiful.
So that's how I look at it, and
Yeah.
sometimes I think people get too fixated on like these, and I don't know if like Atia and Co. I'm not trying to pick on him, but like if if it's intentional, I doubt it is, but like they're like, oh, because they get asked the question, it's like, well, really, you need to get to this time point. But what they're really pointing out is like this is where change like really starts to accelerate and
Yes.
where benefit really starts to take off. But I like the inverse question of like, well, what if I only do it for 20? Well, what benefit does that get me? Well, it doesn't cause further improvement, but it helps you at least maintain what you've done, which is
Yes.
super valuable during times when you're strapped for time, can't get in a full workout, right? Things are nuts. Like, hey, and there's the mental health benefits of
Yeah,
getting
yeah.
it in there,
100%.
right? Like the endocrine response. I'm still improving my insulin sensitivity or at least maintaining my insulin sensitivity. You're preventing any like health backsliding.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, it does seem like sometimes the the hard science guys, it tends to ignore the sociological application of exercise and how valuable it is. Like if I do 45 minutes of like cardio all over the place, but I'm just playing around having fun. There's something to be said for health and longevity about having fun, as opposed to
Absolutely.
just going to the gym and hating everything you do because you're hitting these benchmarks begrudgingly.
Mm-hmm. And that's why at PN we often talk about like using deep health as like a lens to look at things through, right? Like, okay, I might be improving my physical health, but it's taking a toll on my mental health, my emotional health, my social health. Because I'm grinding on a bike alone for
Yeah.
an hour, not interacting with anyone because I want to make sure I'm, staying right at this my talk test, and I'm like, whereas fuck, you could go play my men's league hockey, get in a
Yeah.
great workout, bust chops of all your old high school buddies, and they bust you
Yeah.
back, and you all go out and get dinner and a beer after, and like
Yeah.
there is health value to that.
Yeah. Like even the dinner and beer, there's a cost of the beer, but there's a value of like camaraderie and like love and like social companionship that like
Exactly.
it's not just you're having a beer. Like you are sharing in like communal experiences which humans need while
Right.
having beer. And it's a trade-off. Like 10 beers
Right.
is,
But
is hard to
But
like,
I like to think that the whatever physical detriment might be coming was offset by the hockey I just played, right?
yeah, there's something
So
not, yeah, yeah.
the physical health still went up, or at least stayed the same. I filled my social bucket, which helps my mental and emotional health, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a lot to be said to your point about like making it fun. If you are just grinding, and I think Atia actually touched on this quite well in like in his book where he talked about like improving his emotional health. That whole section, and I was reading it, I was like, oh my God, this is stuff we've been talking about for like years and years. And it feels like his version's a little clunky and not fully formed because it's relatively new to him
Yeah.
in terms of talking about it compared to like when you hear him talk about other things he's talked about a lot. When I
Yeah.
feel like he's very well polished, and has a good perspective. Like this felt new for him to be really talking about to me. But I'm so glad he did because it's not talked about enough. To your point
Mm.
about like having fun or making sure my emotional health is intact, which might sometimes mean exercising less
Yes,
and
100%.
going out and having a social interaction because there's huge value to that, right?
Yeah.
Like the cost of exercising a little bit less and the benefit of socializing, well, that the cost to benefit ratio is there. Now,
Yeah.
if you're having 15 beers and like, a
Yeah.
whole pizza, well, okay. It's not necessary, but even that once in a while,
Yeah.
you can make an argument for it. If it's on the regular, then that's a different conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get
But
that. And
right, like
were
you're
you a
always
personal
looking
trainer
at those.
at any
I
point?
was a person, not anymore. No.
But you were one, right?
Yes.
Every trainer's had the experience of a client comes in, you're like, you know what, we're just gonna shoot the shit today, man. We don't got it. Like, and I've had that countless times where clients like, thank you so much for today. I didn't need to work out. I was dreading it. I didn't have it, and we like grabbed a coffee or just kind of sat on the gym floor and talked. And they're like, I actually needed that way more than I needed working out. And you're like, wow,
Right.
yeah, no, that makes total sense. Okay, I know you got to go soon, so I just want to get one more at least. What are some of your favorite ways to get zone two in?
I mean, my main way is I ride my Airdyne while watching Suits. That's
Nice,
been my go-to lately. I had never watched it before. So, and I
solid
will
show.
say, like
Very
reading a
comforting.
T is what's that?
Very comforting show. Like it's the same algorithm of like the pro. It's I love that
Oh
show.
yeah. And it's
Yeah.
like 43 minutes long and I do it for about 45 minutes.
Oh,
So,
that's yeah. There you
I
go.
just watch an episode and then usually I'll like bike hard the last couple minutes after the episode's done. And I'm like, okay, cool, done for today. Like this is good. So I will credit like this movement and Atia in particular for me, but just this movement of like, well, there's value in doing a little bit more cardio
Yeah. I've been doing
because
more cardio too.
right, like I came up when it was intervals or you just lifted.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Lift and eat and you'll be lean. Well, like that's true, but then I went to run in a race like I don't know 6 or 7 years ago, and it was horrible. Like I did it, and I didn't do badly, but I felt terrible.
Oh, it's
Like,
horrible when you're deconditioned and you're like, oh my God.
and I'm like, and I was like strong, and I could do a full workout like no problem, and like my overall bottom of my pyramid was not good.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, like I could go sprint,
You're top heavy.
but I was top heavy.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so, it was brutal. And so I started doing a little bit more cardio, but it was always like, I don't love cardio. So I just go like run 3 miles as fast as I could.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Right. Like,
This is spoken from someone who is like shifted towards anaerobic training and sports and lifting their whole life, which is me too. Like I gotta find a way to like it.
so, but fine, doing like a zone 2 workout, I can do right in my basement. And what I've liked about it is I'm not crushed after. Like, man, I go about my day, and then the next day I can go lift, and I don't feel like, oh, my legs are sore from doing sprints, or I'm tired from doing a 5 mile run yesterday, which not, yeah, because I don't run enough. Like that 5 mile run will take something out of me,
Yeah.
right? And I'm running it at a hard pace. But these I can just do in between lifting days, and I'm getting in a good workout. But I feel like it's enhancing my recovery between my workouts
Yeah.
and not taking any recovery power away. So I tend to do it on the bike, but I've done it on my rower. But the only problem there is my ass just goes numb. I can only do it for so long on
Yeah.
the rower. So maybe I just need to get adapted to it more.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
just find the bike easier, and I mountain bike too, so I'm already like more used to that. But
Transferable. Yeah.
ultimately, any modality works. Like my wife likes to do incline walk on our treadmill
And
because
do
she
you
doesn't love
use
our
like a heart
bike.
rate monitor and stuff? Like, what do you use do you track it at all, or
I
what
use my
metrics
Apple
do you use to
Watch.
be like, I'm probably doing zone two right now?
I use my Apple Watch just so I'm not like getting like super high, or super low. Because sometimes when I'm watching the show, it can be easy to be like, you don't even realize I've slowed down.
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh shit, like I need to
I'm just
push
watching
a
it.
little bit more,
Where'd this
right?
popcorn come from?
Right? Like exactly. Like, oh, you're now below zone. Like, okay, because I'm like, I'm like on a walk. Like, okay, yeah, I got to pick this up a little bit. So at least I'm putting some stress
Yeah.
on the system, but not so much stress that I'm like pushing it super hard. But if I get a little over, I'm just not super concerned. I bring myself back down. So I don't get overly nitpicky. Like I use I think is it the MAF formula, which is really just like 180 minus your age
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah. Not
It's like the
220
top.
minutes.
What's that?
Oh, that's for
No,
oh, okay.
yeah,
Okay.
so this is for zone two. It's
Yeah.
what the hell is it called? This famous running coach created this.
Yeah.
And his research, this has been, it's like it works for most everyone over and over and over again. It's close enough
Yeah.
ultimately.
The ball.
And then you can subtract or add some. If you've been doing it for a long time and you're super fit, you can add like 5 more beats.
Okay.
If you've been
Nice.
injured and shit, you can like take away. So I actually -5 because I don't remember the exact reason why. So I couldn't even tell you.
Yeah.
I just did it a long time ago. So now I'm at like 135, for example, is my rough top of my zone two. Some days, and I'm not measuring lactate, so some days I can do it with more power at that than others.
Yeah.
But I just chalk that up to recovery. And if my lactate wouldn't have been, I don't care.
Yeah.
Right, where my lactate would have been. Like it's close enough. I'm stressing my mitochondria. They're using more fat as fuel than when I'm running my 3 or 4 miles at like race speed.
Yep.
Because I don't like to run at a slow speed. If I'm gonna run,
Yeah, I get that.
I just go.
Yep.
So really, that's how I do it. But I also I just do a whole host of things. I lift 3 days a week. I play men's league hockey. In the spring, summer, and fall, I mountain bike. I run. I'm not trying to be awesome at any one thing,
Yeah.
other than just like being able to go out and do something that I enjoy and not have to be like, Jesus, I'm terrible at this. I'm super unfit, right? Like I want to go out and mountain bike. I can keep up with some guys that mountain bike more regularly because I'm fit enough, not as skilled as them. So sometimes, they have to wait because I'm struggling up something, but
Hmm.
I can keep up because I have the fitness to go out and do those things.
Yes.
I can go out and run a 10K and, I'm not going to kick ass at it, but I'll be fine.
They'll do it. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Okay. So last question is just what would you, if someone's struggling to get it in, they don't really know how to do it, what would your advice be to the average kind of like doesn't do cardio a lot, wants to do it, is confused by all like the ocean of noise? What's the signal? What would you give them advice for that and applying it to their fitness?
If someone hasn't really done, so someone who's done like really very minimal and is now just starting, like
Yeah.
no exercise or just no cardio.
Let's say no cardio for the average
Okay.
person. So it's like they lift, they might, or if they do cardio, it's like they'll do a crazy intense class and then they might not do it again for a month because they're like, wow, that kicked my ass.
And yeah, and if you want to start incorporating this, I mean, I honestly think like that 180 minus your age or six, if you know what your max heart rate is, because your Apple Watch can tell you, or different wearables, that is the value of some of the technology today. It's easier to find some of that data to give you an idea, which I think gives people a piece of sense of comfort. Like, okay, I know I'm at least close,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I don't worry about it being perfect. You don't need to measure your lactate. Like it's adding more effort than there's value for you because you're not trying
Yes.
to push the limits of athletic performance.
Yes.
You just want to be fitter and healthier. Like 180 minus your age, and then there are some caveats to that, which I could find for you. But that's generally like your upper limit of zone two. And then, roughly no more than 20 beats per minute lower than that is like the bottom of your zone two. And then you can just find a modality that you like and do it, but don't stress over like hitting some super exact numbers. And also, but don't expect to see benefit immediately. Like it doesn't start improving aerobic fitness. It takes time for that to really start to add up and ramp up. Like you'll often see like strength gains faster than you'll see zone two gains.
Yeah.
But if you stick with it long enough, right, you will see like, oh, especially if you can. So like on for example, I use my Airdyne, and like at the end of each session, it'll tell me like what my average watts were, right? Like I've slowly seen my watts creep up, like my average power output creep
Yeah.
up while staying in a zone two. So like I'm slowly, even though I only do it once a week, and it's taken like a year because I just didn't really give a shit. I wasn't trying to necessarily get a performance benefit out of this necessarily, but I have seen my watts slowly creep up on average, like not every workout, right? There's a
It's like lifting.
fluctuation, but
Yeah.
that fluctuation is slowly trending upwards while I'm still staying in my heart rate zone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you want, you can keep an eye on that, but you don't even necessarily even have to, right? It's really, or you can use the talk test where you can talk, but you can't sing, right?
Okay. Actually, I've heard
That,
the sing one. I knew the talk test. I didn't know you couldn't sing.
so usually if you, but now that's not true for everybody, but it's like a
Yeah.
general rule of thumb.
Yeah.
If you're really fit, that doesn't tend to work for people because their fitness level is so high they can, but if you're relatively new to this, definitely. So ultimately, and I would also point out that like, it's not going to feel like your intense workouts feel. And I
Yes.
think that's something that people have a hard time with is they'll do a strength workout versus like a class. And they say like, oh my God, I burned 100 more calories in my class than my strength workout. Yes, but worrying about how many calories you burn in a workout is like worrying about how much muscle you built in a workout.
Yeah.
It can be a marker of how hard you worked, but it's not the sole determinant of whether it was a good workout or not. Just like being super sore the next day is not always a determinant of how good of a lifting workout you had, right? There are like other benefits to an exercise that might not cause soreness. So I think too often people equate like how difficult something is with how valuable it is.
Yeah.
So
100%.
zone 2 is intentionally not difficult,
Yeah. You
right?
shouldn't
And you
walk
have to
away
be
from it.
okay with that because a
Like,
lot of people want to
what
just
should the
make
end of a zone 2 session feel like for someone like, say someone, I think most of us, to your point, are propelled towards, we use being fatigued as a marker of a successful workout. Now, if you are stuck in that cycle, which I think majority of people who exercise associate those two, but what should it feel like when they leave a zone 2 session?
good, like you exercise, but you're not, you could go do it again.
Okay, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, because no one's leaving a Barry's boot camp class saying I could do that again.
No,
Yeah.
I'm not. When I get done a hard lift, I'm not like, man, I can go do another hour of that. Like,
Yeah.
I'm smoked,
Yeah, 100%.
But like, I do 45 minutes of zone 2, and other than boredom, I could do 45 minutes more.
Yeah, that's
Right?
the metric that's gonna get in the way for a lot of people. And it's just like it's not fit. Like
And
people,
time.
yeah, boredom and time. That's gonna be the constraints, not like my legs are just burning so much I can't do it. Like if that's happening, you're probably going too hard, right?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
you are going too hard. It's usually a sign that and we know lactate doesn't cause that, but they're accumulating at the same time as hydrogen ions. So if
Yeah,
you're
there's
feeling that
lactate levels.
significant burning, you're well outside of zone 2, which still has its own benefits.
Yep.
But you're gonna now require maybe a little bit of recovery from that workout as opposed to a zone 2 workout. So
Perfect.
I mean, I think for a lot of people, it's a way to get in activity that tends to be easier on the joints. And if you're like sprinting or doing like higher impact, higher intensity things, it boosts recovery. It has other benefits that high intensity exercise also has, but without that recovery component. So it allows you to get in an activity or increase your overall activity levels without feeling more beat up or drained. Like if you add like a 4th lifting session to a week, like you'll know,
Yeah, you'll
right?
know.
Like if you add a zone 2 workout to a week, you don't feel like, oh my God, so much more drained. At the end of the day, you're not like, man, that zone 2 workout this morning really kicked my ass. Like,
that would be awesome.
That's
like,
so it allows you to like on an off day, like
yeah.
what would normally have been an off day, you can get in a 30 or 45 minute and it's providing benefit.
Yeah.
And it's helping your recovery and not taking away from your recovery. And it's increasing the bottom, you know what I mean? All those things we're talking about.
It's allowing you to watch Suits as well.
It allows me to watch Suits. The only time I'm going to get TV in. So.
100%. Yeah, that makes total sense. All right, I think I got everything I need here. This was awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time. I definitely going to continue this. This was really good.
Awesome. I mean, yeah, it's the kind of thing where like, hey, if someone really wants to check their lactate because they're just curious and they're a data nerd, like go for it.
Yeah.
If it's not negatively impacting your deep health and making you feel shitty about yourself and like making the whole thing miserable, like our CEO would love that. He would love to check his lactate while he's working out. Where I'm like, no, I'm not poking myself. Right?
Yeah.
That's just not why I'm working out.
Yeah.
So, but if you love the data and the numbers, like there's no harm in that. But it's not required to get the benefit of it.
That's the issue, is when it's sold as if it's required.
Right.
Then it's making people who are outside of that feel like they're missing something, and you're kind of like,
exactly,
you're using your status to leverage their ignorance to make them buy stuff that they don't need, essentially.
Exactly.
Which is just too common in the industry. Okay, perfect. All right, thank you so much, Brian. It was really nice meeting you as well.
You too. Thanks, Dylan. Bye.
And that's going to do it for today's episode. Once again, thanks for listening. Make sure to like and follow and share this podcast wherever you listen it. And if you want to check out what I offer with online coaching, you can check that out in the show notes of this episode. All right, I'll talk to you next time. Cheers.